Seems like you've done a lot of walking over the past few days.
Yeah, I have. But that's not why my legs hurt. I have arthritis.
The walking doesn't make it feel worse? Doesn't
No,
it flare up at all? Oh,
no, it doesn't go away unless it wants to.
oy vey.
Bad.
Oy vey. Okay, let's go to the Talmud. Let's start with the blessing, Baruch,
Baruch
Atah,
atah Adonai
Adonai, Eloheinu,
Eloheinu melech
Melech
haolam
haolam, Asher
asher kiddushanu
kiddushanu b'mitzvotav,
u'tzvasa
v'tzivanu
v'tzivanu
al
al
divrei
divrei
Torah.
Torah.
Okay, so we're in the middle of a very interesting discussion over here. The discussion is whether the berries, the buds, the shoots of the caper bush are considered a fruit or are considered a vegetable. This matters for a few different reasons. Number one, what blessing do you make on them? Number two, we know that there is a prohibition against eating fruit for the first 3 years of its existence. So for the first 3 years of the tree's life, you cannot eat its fruit. If the caper bush is considered a tree, and the buds and the berries and the shoots and the leaves are considered fruit, then you will not be allowed to eat them for the first 3 years. However, if it is considered not a tree, and therefore the buds, the berries, the shoots, and the leaves will all be considered vegetables, then you can eat them as soon as you plant it and it starts growing. What it seems to be, what's so fascinating about the caper bush is that you have so many different things which are all edible that come from the caper bush. You have the bud, you have the berry, you have the small, like the shoots, like the little branches that are coming out while they're still young are also edible, and the leaves are also edible. So far, it seems to be that there is a distinction between the bud and the berry versus the shoots and the leaves. That the bud and the berry would be considered a fruit. However, the leaves and the shoots would be considered part of the tree and therefore would be allowed to be eaten even during the first 3 years. I'm gonna just run. I forgot to turn the air conditioner cooler, so I'm gonna be back in just a second. Okay, I apologize. I am back. Good morning, Zalman. We're just getting into it, and we're going to go just a little bit backwards, and then we're going to jump forwards.
Mhm.
So we finished with an explanation, and the Gemara challenged that explanation. This is what we learned last week. This is the last paragraph or two from what we learned last week. Is that so? Didn't Rabbi Nachman say in the name of Rabba bar Avuha that if you have a fruit which is arla, arla is the Jewish word from the Torah, which describes the first 3 years of the tree, and those fruits from the first 3 years of the tree's life may not be eaten. Those arla date coverings are prohibited. I guess the date grows in something that protects it, and it's prohibited because it becomes protection for the fruit. And when do these coverings serve as protection for the fruit? Only when the fruit is still young. And then it falls off. And he nevertheless calls them protection for the fruit. That indicates that in order to be considered protection for the fruit, it need not remain until the fruit is fully ripened. So the question remains, why are the buds not accorded the same status as the berries of the caper bush? The berries we know are considered fruit and therefore will be prohibited during the first 3 years of that tree's life. However, the question becomes, what about the buds? Why are the buds allowed to be eaten? We thought that the reason is that it's not considered a protection for the fruit because it falls off while the fruit is still young. However, we see a clear teaching that even though the covering of the date falls off while the date is still young, it's considered a protection for the date and is prohibited during the first 3 years of the date tree's life. The Gemara explains that Rav Nachman held in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yosef. As we learned in the Mishnah, Rabbi Yosef says the grape bud, which is a cluster of grapes when it's tiny, tiny, immediately after the flowers dropped from the vine, is prohibited due to Arla because at that point it is already considered a fruit. So that's why that Rabbi Nachman, who was quoting Rabbi Baravua, said that the date coverings are considered a protection of the fruit because he held that even when the date was a tiny little date, it was considered a fruit, and therefore whatever is protecting it when it is little and tiny is also going to be considered a fruit. However, if we go according with the opinion that it's only considered a fruit once it's already possible to eat, and before that stage it is not yet granted the status of a fruit, whatever covers it at that young stage is not going to be considered part of the fruit. Let's read this inside. According to this opinion, even the date coverings that exist in the earliest stage of the ripening process are nevertheless considered protection for the fruit, and therefore would be prohibited due to Arla. The rabbis, however, disagree with him, explaining that fruit at that stage is not considered fruit, and therefore the date coverings and the caper bush buds would not be considered protection for the fruit, and therefore would not be considered due to Arla. I'm just going to take a quick sip. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, shehakol nהיה b'dvarai. That is where we got until last week, and now we have Rabbi Shimi of Naharda. Naharda was one of the big Talmudic academies in Babylon. Is Babylon and Babylonia the same thing, just two different ways of saying it?
I mean, I think, I'm not sure, but I think Babylon refers to the city and Babylonia, the region.
Let's see what Google says. Is Babylon and Babylonia the same? Babylonia is the Greek form of the name Babylon, sometimes translated as Gate of God, known as city of Babylon. The city of Babylon was the main city and the capital of Babylonia. The Babylonians were the people who lived in Babylonia. They were a mixture of different people with different origins. Yes, Zaman is correct. Thank you. I learned something new today. So Naharda was one of the big Talmudic academies. There were two huge Talmudic academies in Babylonia, and one of them was in the city of Naharda. So Rabbi Shimi of Naharda strongly objects to this ruling, to this halacha. Do the rabbis disagree with the opinion of Rabbi Yosef with regard to the fruit of all other trees besides for grapes? That even in the very first stage of ripening, they are considered fruit? That argument was only an argument when it came to grapes. That Rabbi Yosef said that as soon as they are little round, tiny little things, it's already considered a fruit. However, the rabbis disagree and say that until it starts ripening and actually filling with juice, it's not considered a fruit. Just because they had that argument about the grape doesn't mean that they argue about all other kinds of fruits. For example, let's see. Didn't we learn in a Mishnah with regard to fruit that grows during the sabbatical year? We know that the sabbatical year, every 7th year, we're not allowed to plow the ground, we're not allowed to harvest either. And our fields must remain, at least in the land of Israel, our fields must remain available that anyone can take as they please. So, with regards to fruit which grows during the sabbatical year, the Torah tells us the Shabbat of the land shall be to you for eating. The sages inferred from here for eating and not for loss. Does anyone want to explain to us what does it mean for eating and what for loss? Let's read one more sentence. Because one is prohibited from discarding fruit grown during the sabbatical year, the question is raised. So we're going to get to that in a minute, but I'll just tell you that if you're ever in Israel during the sabbatical year, I was not yet privileged. However, I have a friend of mine who went to Israel, American boy, and it was the sabbatical year, and he was eating a fruit, an apple, and he finished his apple. He's down to the core, and he was about to throw it in the garbage, and one of the Israeli boys started screaming at him, "You can't do that!" He said, "What's wrong? It's an apple core. I want to throw it in the garbage." He says, "No, fruit from the sabbatical year, you're not just allowed to throw it out. So they have a special place where they put it. I don't know if compost or whatever. But we're not allowed to throw out any part of the fruit. Any part of the fruit that grows during the sabbatical year cannot be thrown away." So over here also, if the buds are considered
Re
fruit,
recycling 3,000 years ago.
yeah, exactly. If the if the buds are considered fruit, then you're not allowed to throw them away. But if they're not considered fruit, you would be allowed to throw them away. So you see, there's so many different laws associated with what is the categorization of these buds. Are they a fruit or are they not a fruit? It's fascinating. From when may one no longer cut down trees during the sabbatical years, as therefore he is damaging the fruit? Meaning, if there is a branch of a tree, you're allowed to cut it down and use it for firewood. However, if that tree branch has a fruit on it, then you're not allowed to cut down that tree because you will be killing the fruit. So
During
at what
sabbatical,
point and at what stage is it already considered fruit?
Rabbi,
Yeah.
during the sabbatical year, are you, do you, how can I put this? Are you allowed to keep the trees that are there growing and just not plant any new ones, or do you take away everything that's growing?
That is a great question. So during the sabbatical year, we're not allowed to work the field at all. So we're not allowed to prune the trees. We're not allowed to plant, sow, till, etc. But the aftergrowth, which is whatever grows on its own, I believe we have a lot more of that nowadays that we harvest with machinery. A lot of kernels that fall down to the floor and they just plant themselves. That is permitted to be eaten. The fruits that are already there, the trees that are already there, can be left there, and that's how the Jewish people would survive from whatever just grew by itself during the field and from whatever produce they had left over from the previous year.
You just don't work the fields at all.
Correct. Yeah.
Second.
So, Beis Shammai says, all trees, from when the blossoms fall off and the fruit begins to emerge in its earliest stage. So, Beis Shammai says, it doesn't matter what kind of tree, as soon as the blossom falls off and you can start seeing a fruit forming, at that point it's considered a fruit and you're not allowed to chop down the branch of that tree. Beis Hillel say that there is a distinction between the different types of trees. Carob trees may not be cut down from when they form chains of carobs. What are chains of carobs? Maybe let's do
What is
stages
the
of.
carob? The carob of fruit, or what is it?
It's very interested. It's a very not yeah carob. Let me see if I can find a carob tree here. So it's this is a carob tree. It's opening up on the right side of the screen. Um, it's very interesting taste.
Looks like a fig.
It's like a long, dry, but I guess you see that it grows in kind of clusters. So once these clusters begin to form, then even though they're not yet, it's the entire inside is filled with seeds. So when you're eating it, it's very interesting to eat. But that
You could
is,
eat it raw. You don't have to cook.
yeah, you eat it raw. Has a interesting kind of taste to it. I don't know how I could explain the taste. The texture is a
I've
little
seen
chewy.
I've seen it with in relation to like chocolate substitute or something like that?
Yes, I've seen people making carob chocolate. Yes. So this is what the carob looks like. Okay, so once it starts beginning to make its chains, then it would be already considered a fruit. A vine may not be cut down mi she yigoru. The question is, what does that mean? Does that mean from when the seeds come in? Does that mean from something else? We're going to see soon, and the difference of how you explain that is going to make a difference to what the final law is going to be. How are we translating that word? Not translating, but defining. Olives from when they blossom, and all other trees from when the fruit emerges. So Beis Hillel agreed to Beis Shammai with regards to most trees. However, they argue when it comes to olives, grapes, and carobs. And Ravasi said, Shiyigaru in our mission is to be understood that it is an unripe grape. It is a grape kernel. It is a white bean. Before this is even explained, the Gemara expresses an astonishment. Does it enter your mind that the grape is at any stage a white bean? Rather say its size is that the size of an unripe grape is equivalent to the size of a white bean. In any case, whom did you hear that said an unripe grape? Yes, is considered a fruit. While a grape bud, no, a grape bud is not considered a fruit. Wasn't that the rabbis who disagreed with Rabbi Yossi? The Rabbi Yossi said as soon as the grape exists in its tiniest form, it is already considered a fruit. The rabbis argued on that, and the rabbis said that the grape has to be a certain size, the size of a white bean, in order to be considered a fruit. So that means that the rabbis in that former discussion that we had and the sages in our Mishnah must be the same opinion. And what did we learn in our Mishnah? That according to these sages, even though there was an argument when it came to grapes, and they said that grapes are only considered a grape once it reaches the size of a white bean. However, what else did they say? That one is forbidden to cut down all other trees. From what stage? From when the fruit emerges. This indicates that even they agree that at all other trees, from the very beginning of the ripening process, the fruit is forbidden due to Arla. If that's the case, then the caper berries would be considered fruit as soon as they emerge. The caper bud would be considered a protection of the fruit at a point where it is already considered a fruit, and therefore the buds should be prohibited due to Arla. So we're back with our question, why are these buds permitted? We following so far?
Mm-hmm.
Good. Rather, Rava said a different explanation. Where do we say that a section of the plant becomes protection for the fruit? Is only where if you remove the protection, the fruit will die. For example, if you have an orange and you peel it, it will not grow into an orange. Apparently, I guess the same thing would be with the dates. If you remove that cover before the date is big enough and before it's ready to fall off on its own, it will die. Here, in the case of the caper bush, if you remove the bud, the fruit does not die. In fact, there was an incident, and they removed the flower of the pomegranate, and the pomegranate withered. They removed the flower of the fruit of a caper bush, and the fruit of the caper bush survived. So they made a test, and they took off the pomegranate flower, and they took off the bud from the caper bush. The pomegranate died, the caper bush, the caper berry, survived. So that shows us that the buds are not considered protection of the fruit, and therefore the pomegranate's flower is considered part of the fruit and therefore is forbidden during the first 3 years. The bud of the caper bush is not considered part of the tree, part of the fruit, sorry, and therefore would be permitted even during the first 3 years of this caper bush's life. Okay, now we have a case study and a double-blind trial. The Gemara concludes.
Not really a double-blind trial, but
I know. The Gemara concludes the halacha is in accordance with the opinion of Mar Bar of Ashi, who discarded the berries and ate the buds. And since they are not considered fruit with regard to Arla, they are also not considered fruit with regard to blessings. And one does not recite over them who creates the fruit of the tree, rather, who creates the fruit of the ground. And this was published in all of the Talmudic journals and plastered on all the walls. Just kidding. But that is the final conclusion. L'chaim. Okay, what's next? Peppers.
So do they go through every single vegetable and fruit?
I doubt it. But we're going to get a lot of general rules from each different category. So let me ask you this before we get into this. Why would you think that peppers would have a different blessing than cucumbers? Over here, we're not talking about bell peppers, which in many parts of the world are not called peppers. I believe over here we're talking about peppercorns.
What is a peppercorn?
Like a black pepper or a like a jalapeno pepper. Like these sharp peppers.
I mean, does that come from a bush or a tree? It's a bush.
So if it comes from a bush, it would make the blessing that everything that comes from the ground. So it would have the same blessing, like the regular bell pepper, the same blessing as a strawberry, same blessing as a cucumber, same blessing as a tomato. Doesn't grow on a tree, so it's very clear and very obvious that the blessing will be, blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who has brought forth fruit of the ground. However, when it comes to certain spices, like we're going to see next is ginger, things which people don't eat, do you need to recite a blessing on them? And if yes, what blessing would you make?
Well, ginger is a root. So it'd be like the same thing as a potato.
A potato and a carrot, yeah.
Yeah.
Potato, carrot, radish. Okay, so let's read this inside. So we're going through different categories. We've made the general presumptions. We've also gone through already a discussion of what categorizes a tree, makes something considered a tree. And now we're going to look at another exception, another interesting phenomenon. Rav Shesha said, one who eats pepper must recite, by whose word all things came to be. It doesn't fall into any category, but you can't eat without making a blessing, as we learned in the beginning of the entire discussion about this concept. However, Rava said one need not recite any blessing at all. If you're eating a spice, right, that you're eating ginger or you're eating cloves, you wouldn't make a blessing. Why? This is consistent with Rava's opinion that eating peppers is not considered eating. As Rava said, one who chews on pepper on Yom Kippur, not again, this is not bell pepper, this is real pepper, is exempt. One who chews on ginger on Yom Kippur is exempt. Eating sharp spices is an uncommon practice and is therefore not considered to be eating. Eating is prohibited by Torah law on Yom Kippur. Chewing on ginger is not considered eating. Okay. The Gemara raises an objection to this based on what was taught in a brisa. Let's look how peppercorns grow, because I think that this is going to be black pepper. Let's look at images. Yeah, it grows on some kind of a tree. That's interesting. Grows like in a cluster. Very pretty. Okay. The Gemara raised an objection to this based on what is taught in a brisa. Regarding the verse tells us, when you enter the land of Israel and you will plant any tree for food, you shall regard its fruit as arla and not eat it for the first 3 years. Rabbi Meir would say, by inference from that which is stated, you shall regard its fruit as arla. Don't I already know that it's referring to a tree that produces food? Of course, it's not talking to a barren tree because a barren tree does not have any fruit that grows from it. Rather, for what purpose does the verse state any tree for food means that we're including a tree whose wood and fruit have the same taste. If the wood and the fruit have the same taste, the wood itself is also going to be forbidden, I believe. Rather, for what purpose does the verse state any tree for food to include a tree whose wood and whose fruit have the same taste? What tree does the wood and the fruit have the same taste? This is the pepper tree. And this comes to teach you that peppers and even the wood portion are edible and therefore are obligated in the prohibition of arla. So we see from here that peppers are considered a fruit, and peppers are considered a food, and peppers are considered edible. And to teach us that the land of Israel lacks nothing, as it is stated, a land where you shall eat bread without scarceness, you shall lack nothing. Obviously, from here we see that peppers are fit for consumption. So if peppers are fit for consumption, how could you tell me that it's not a food? And how could you tell me that it needs no blessing? The Gemara responds that this is not difficult because there is a distinction between the two different cases. This where Rabbi Meir spoke of peppers that are fit for consumption, that is referring when it is still damp and still fresh, and therefore is considered edible. However, where chewing on pepper is not considered eating on Yom Kippur, does not require a blessing, is referring to a case when the peppers have already been dried, and at that stage they're not edible. So we need a botanist to explain that to us. With regard to this discussion of chewing pepper on Yom Kippur, so now we're going to go on for a tangent of speaking about eating on Yom Kippur. The Gemara cites what the sages said to Maremar. Why is one who chews ginger on Yom Kippur exempt? Didn't Rava say that one is permitted to eat the ginger that comes from India? I don't know why they would think it was prohibited, but he said it's permitted. And over it, one recites the blessing who creates fruit of the ground. With regard to blessing, it is considered edible. And if it's considered edible and therefore you make a blessing over it, with regard to chewing on Yom Kippur, it should also be considered edible. And the Gemara responds the same thing. There it is not difficult. Where is a blessing recited as if it is still damp and still fresh? I believe there are people who will eat ginger on occasion. And this, where no blessing is recited, is referring to a case where the ginger is dry. If you ever buy sushi, they serve pickled ginger. I don't like it, but Nechama does.
I like it.
Sorry?
I like it.
You like it.
Me
So
too.
I guess, okay, perfect. So I guess you would make the blessing over the fruit from the ground. However, if it is dried and in a stick form, I guess, that point it's considered inedible. I did one time actually try chewing a slice of ginger. I was putting ginger in a tea or something, and was not the most palatable experience, shall I say. Okay, so now we're gonna have another dispute about different kind of edible situation. The Gemara cites a similar dispute with regard to the blessing recited over havitz.
What's habit?
What is havitz? Havitz is a dish consisting of flour, oil, and honey, and cooked in a pot. Let's see if Google knows what havitz is. I would love to see a picture of that.
They gave you
Uh,
headsets.
yeah, I know. No, gefilte fish? No, it's not gefilte fish. Okay, fine. some kind of, you take flour, oil, and honey, and you cook it in a pot. So if you take flour, oil, and honey, and you cook them in a pot, what kind of blessing are you going to make? It's not bread,
Sounds like bread pudding to a sort of.
sort of.
Hmm.
What about pounded grain, or as we would call today's thingy, oatmeal? What blessing would oatmeal be? It's not bread. It's also not a vegetable. Rav Yehuda said that one recites by whose word all things came to be, which is the catch-all blessing. Rav Kahana said that one recites who creates the various kind of nourishment, which is the blessing we make over grains which have been turned into an edible, for example, cake and things like that, but it's not bread. The Gemara explains. With regard to pounded grain by itself, if you're eating just the oatmeal, everyone will agree that you recite who creates the various kind of nourishment. When do they argue is with regard to this pounded grain that's mixed with honey. If pounded grain is mixed with honey, it's very similar to the havitz, which is cooked in a pot. Rav Yehuda said one recites by whose words all came to be because he held that the honey is primary. I guess he put a lot of honey into his oatmeal, right? When the kids come home and I ask them what was for lunch in camp, and they tell me ketchup.
Honey, how can the honey be primary? It's the oatmeal
I'll explain to
primary.
you. It depends if you're making oatmeal for me or if you're making oatmeal for my kid.
Even so, I mean, even oatmeal for the kids, no matter how much honey you're putting in, you're putting it in the oatmeal. The oatmeal is the meal. The honey is just to make it taste better.
I'll tell you, when my kids come home from camp, I ask them what was for lunch today. They tell me ketchup. I ask them what was with the ketchup. A little bit of chicken, maybe some rice, but lunch was ketchup. So what is the main thing? Is the main thing the honey? Is the sweetness of the taste? Or is the main thing the oatmeal of the taste?
Well,
So Rabbi Yehuda,
as far as nourishment is concerned, oatmeal. I mean, your children your children may remember the ketchup because that's what tastes good. But as far as nourishing them, it's the chicken.
true, true. Let me put it this way. When it comes to blessings, there are certain interesting rules that we're going to learn soon. For example, there is a great discussion when it comes to, you know what, this same discussion. The same discussion comes to, okay, maybe let's, okay, let's just quickly finish this discussion and then I want, please remind me about licorice. Because licorice, there is a great discussion and it's very similar to this. So let's read this and then that will give us the background that we need to know for licorice. Ready?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So Rabbi Yehuda said that one recites by whose words all things came to be because he held that the honey is primary. And on honey, one recites by whose word all things came to be. In other words, when you're eating, just because there's grain there and it's sustaining you, but why are you eating it? Are you eating it because you wanted a sweet snack? Or are you eating it because you wanted a healthy breakfast? If you're eating it because you wanted a sweet snack, so then the honey is primary. And everything else is just there in order that it shouldn't be overpoweringly sweet. However, if you're eating it because of the nourishment and because of the breakfast capacity, then the grain would be the primary. Rav Kahana said one recites who creates the various kind of nourishment because he held that flour, as is the case with all products produced from grain, is going to be primary, just like Zalman said. And therefore one will recite who creates the various kinds of nourishment. Rav Yosef said it is reasonable to say in accordance with the opinion of Rav Kahana, as Rav and Shmuel both said, anything that has the 5 species of grain in it, one recites over it who creates the various kind of nourishment, even if it's mixed with other ingredients. As long as there is flour there, it will automatically be considered a blessing who creates the various kinds of nourishment, even if the flour is not the main ingredient. So with regard to the halacha of the blessing recited over the 5 species of grain, which are oat, spelt, rye, wheat, and barley. The Gemara clarifies the matter itself. Rav and Shmuel both said anything that has of the 5 species of grain in it, one recites over it who creates various kinds of nourishment. Elsewhere it was stated, Rav and Shmuel both said anything that is from the 5 species of grain, one recites over it who creates the various kind of nourishment. So these seem to be redundant. Anything that has of the 5 species of grain in it, one says, who creates the various kind of nourishment. The second one is, Rav Shmuel both said anything that is from the 5 species of grain, one recites over it, who creates the various kind of nourishment. So what's the difference between if it has the 5 grains in it, or if it is from the 5 species of grain? The Gemara explains both of these statements are necessary. If you would have only said anything that is from the 5 species of grain, one recites over it, who creates various kinds of nourishment, I would have said that is because the grain in it is pure, unadulterated form. But if one eats it in the context of a mixture, then no, one would not recite who creates the various kind of nourishment. Very good. We have completed page 36b. Therefore, he teaches us anything that has of the 5 species of grain in it, even if it is in a context of a mixture with other ingredients. And had he told us only anything that has of the 5 species of grain in it, I would have said specifically over anything that has of the 5 species of grain in it, yes, one will recite the various kinds of nourishment, even if it is in the context of a mixture with other ingredients. However, anything that has rice or millet, no, one does not recite who creates various kinds of nourishment, because one is eating it in the context of a mixture.
I you don't need. I mean, rice.
Sorry?
Rice, you can eat by itself.
You could. So what he's saying over here is that if he would have not said only the 5 grains twice, then you would have thought that this refers also to rice and millet, which are also nourishing and also similar quality to grain. Because one is eating it in the context of mixture. However, if the rice or millet is in its pure, unadulterated form, say that even over rice and millet, one recites who creates the various kinds of nourishment, because they too are types of grain. And therefore, he teaches us specifically anything that is from the 5 species of grain, one recites over it who creates the various kinds of nourishment, to the exclusion of rice and millet, which even in its pure, unadulterated form, one does not recite who creates the various kinds of nourishment, because rice and millet are not included in this blessing. So with that introduction, let's look at what is the bracha on licorice. So here.
Licorice is a root, right?
Yeah, but not the licorice that you eat, licorice candy, I guess we would call it. Let's look at licorice.
Well, the licorice candy is made from the root.
Right.
That's what
So I
we
guess
call
this
it.
is the root, and then Twizzlers would be licorice, and then other kinds of
If they actually have any real licorice in it, of course. That's
yes,
just that's just artificial flavors.
correct. Um, so what you find interesting over here is that licorice has wheat in it, but the wheat is only the flour is only there in order to create the consistency. It's not there for the taste, it's there for the consistency. So that
The
is where,
candy you're talking about.
yeah, the licorice candy. The question, licorice is made from wheat. So what is the blessing? Do we say shahakal, which is the catch-all blessing for all, by whose word all things came to be? Answer, that is true. It is almost universally accepted among the poskim, which is the codifiers, to say shahakal on it because the flour is not there for satiation, nor is it there for taste, but only as a binder. So we can go through a whole long, can look more about it, see if there's any more short.
Where's licorice grown?
Sorry?
Where's licorice grown?
Where is licorice grown? Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. It is used in flavoring in candy, other foods, and tobacco products. Many licorice products sold in the United States do not contain actual licorice, just like you said. Uh, So licorice has wheat in it, yet it is considered to be the blessing, not considered to be satiating, because the wheat over there is only as the binder. So that's one example where you see that um, the blessings are very complicated. The laws of blessings, well, even what we're going to learn in the Talmud, we're not going to get a clear picture of everything. The laws over blessings are extremely complex and probably one of the most complex laws in the entire Judaism. Because of all these little details, and a lot of it is subjective. Okay. With regards to the previous conclusion, the Gemara asks 1 second, and this is going to open up a big can of worms. Over rice and millet, we do not recite who creates the various kinds of nourishment. Why not? Rice is nourishing. Millet is nourishing. What is millet? Millet is a highly varied group of small seeded grasses grown around the world as cereal crops or grains for fodder and human food. Most millets belong to the tribe Panaceae. Okay. So this is millet. Apparently it is very satiating. So let's look back at the Talmud over here. Wasn't it taught in a brisa if they brought before him rice bread or millet bread? What blessing do you make over bread that is made from rice or from millet? He recites the blessing of it both before and after, as he would recite the blessing over a cooked dish containing dough of the 5 species of grain. What is that? With regard to a cooked dish, it was taught in a brisa. At the start, one recites who creates the various kinds of nourishment, and at the end, one recites one blessing abridged from the 3 blessings of the grace after meals. So apparently, it seems from here, from this brisa, that who creates the various kinds of nourishment is recited over rice and millet. So why did the previous conclusion tell us that we recite only this blessing over the 5 grains of rye, spelt, oats, wheat, and barley? Over here, we seem to have a brisa that says we recite this blessing even over rice and millet. We're going to stop here.
Well, rice and millet are grains too, aren't they?
Sorry?
Rice and millet are grains also, aren't they? Are they considered grains?
So they are technically a grain. However, in Judaism, we have a concept of the 5 grains. These are 5 grains which are being codified as being the primary forms of sustenance.
Did they know about rice back then?
Apparently, we're discussing it.
Oh, it's in the Talmud itself, rice is mentioned.
Right.
Oh.
We're discussing rice and millet. The question is,
Yeah.
you know, what blessing would we make over them? Tomorrow, we will not be having a Wednesday class. I don't know if Chaim usually sees my text messages or not. Would you be able to let him know that we're not having a Wednesday class tomorrow?
Yeah. Did you send out the notice yesterday? I didn't receive one.
About
today.
the Talmud class?
Today's class.
About today's class? I received it, so it should have come through. I apologize if it didn't.
Excuse me, sure. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I wanted to tell you that Rita was taken to the hospital.
She came back and then she went to the hospital?
She came back when, you mean?
I'm asking, when did she come back? She was out of town. She came back already?
Well, I came back, but I didn't see her, and then I heard she was on the ground and they put her in the hospital.
Oh, no.
I don't know yet. I'll call her, but I don't know what happened. Whether it's lack of oxygen or... Anyway, it's terrible.
It is terrible. Misha Berach Avisin Avram Yitzchak V'Yaakov Moshe Aaron David Shlomo Baruch Yirape S. Rachel Leah Bas. Do you know her mother's name?
Can't remember.
Okay. Basar Babur Shablinei Yidl Istak Babur B'Schai Zakadosh Baruch Hu Malachim Olah Lachlimo L'Rapaiso Lachzik L'Chayes V'Yisach L'Meher Refuah Shleim L'Shamayim L'Chalei Barav V'Gidel V'Sesh Echad Yisrael Refuah Nefesh Refuah Guf Hashtar B'Agalav Izman Kariv V'Nomar Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you,
God
Rabbi.
willing, we'll see you either this Shabbos or next Tuesday.
Okay. Have a nice meeting tomorrow.
Thank you. Take care.
Yeah,
Thank
bye.
you, Rabbi.